Are we live
All
streaming?
right, we should be, yeah, we are live on YouTube. This is the September 15th, 2021 meeting of the Node Loaders group. I'm going to eat my lunch, so I'm going to turn off my camera and kick it off to, we have Jacob and Bradley. If you guys don't mind, or I'll start the document and add the people and stuff. So.
Cool.
So I think we only have one agenda item, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So since the Yarn folks couldn't make today, I was thinking we might as well keep this week's meeting, and then I'll have to negotiate with them to figure out a time that works for them. But now that we landed Jacob's big PR that collapses the hooks into the new API, then the natural next step would be to do the chaining. I think there's like kind of two steps here. We need to get the chaining design written down on a document that like everyone is okay with, and then obviously implement it. But like there is like if you go to the homepage of the Loaders repo, there's a link there that says design. That design is like the design for chaining that I wrote like a year ago. So, and Jacob wanted to potentially change it. So I think step one would be like a PR to basically replace or update, depending, that file with whatever the new design is. Let's get that landed with, you know, all the Loaders group people approving, and then he can go and implement it. Does that sound like a plan?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, so Jacob, do you mind driving this if you want to like share your screen or pull up the other proposal, or like
Yes.
yours or a different one or whatever, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yes. Let me just find the tab. What's this? Oh, it's here. Okay. Okay, here we go. All right, so I have not updated this for our discussion in Slack earlier, but basically we've got the two leading proposals for how to go about chaining. The primary one, to refresh everybody's memory, was involving a next, which would be whatever the next loader is in the chain. So the first loader called is responsible for calling the next one, and then that next one calls the next one in sort of like an inception kind of pattern. And it can do that or not do that. And then the alternative proposal is a done-like function. So the main impetus for this was to facilitate short circuiting. For instance, if you have some kind of mock loader, it does its mocking and says nothing else needs to happen, stop. In the next version of this, it would just not call next and instead return something. And in the done version, it would explicitly call whatever this done function is, and that would signal that it should stop. The main reason behind this was, for the alternate proposal, was that with the next function, it seemed to me that it would be very easy to make a mistake and accidentally short circuit, which in fact happened to me when I was doing the original implementation and was writing tests. And then suddenly all of my stuff started behaving very strangely in a way that was not very clear what was happening. So the updates to come of this are for the alternate proposal. Currently, there are multiple different kinds of returns that seem kind of overcomplicated. So I'm thinking.
Well, can we pause for a second?
Yes.
Not to say that like we shouldn't. Like I just want to step back for a second when you talk about the like forgetting to call next problem.
Mm-hmm.
So not to say that we should go with that design versus the other design, but like, you know, also that design could certainly be improved on its own merits, so that we could, as could this. Like I know you're about to talk about simplifying these 5 return values to something less than 5. So, you know, it might be that we want to like kind of develop both designs to the best versions of themselves to that, and then compare and contrast them. But, or maybe that's not necessary. But like one thing I was thinking of with talking about forgetting to call next, I feel like there should be some way to, like, short of completely changing the design, there should be some way to like catch that or error. Like maybe a hook always needs to return something, you know, and it's either the expected return value or true or whatever, you know what I mean? And like if it doesn't return either one, if it just like exits without returning anything or something like that, then Node would throw an error. And that way it's like, okay, you know, you forgot something, you didn't follow the spec, etc.
I think when I encountered the problem, it was not that straightforward. It was that something was getting returned, and the thing that was getting returned was valid, but it was not what it should have been, and that was caused by not causing next.
You were short circuiting without realizing you were doing so.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah. Anyway, I feel like, yeah, that could be something we figure out how to improve within the scope of that design. But sure, let's continue whatever the new design is.
Okay. Cool. So currently, I had taken a leaf out of Loadash's playbook in coming up with a return value of false to cause it to sort of like break the loop. But I'm realizing after some discussions that actually is not really necessary to have something like an explicit case to handle that. Instead, you could merely just call done, or whatever we decide to call it. And that would effectively achieve the same thing, because false is just a flavor of a short circuit. And I'm thinking that instead you could just call done with an object and empty values for it. And then those empty values would just get used. And the use case for that is, let's say, I don't know, you're loading an image and the image is not used. Or like you're loading JSON and the JSON is not necessary in this context. So instead you just say like, ignore this. This file import is not important. And that would basically then leave us with done and a valid return, and then potentially nullish, where nullish would say, like this loader did nothing. And that kind of allows the loaders to sort of like opt in. So the loader can say like, if the file extension is TypeScript, I am a TypeScript loader, I should do my thing. If it's not, then I do nothing. And then it just goes on to the next one.
So this is a unidirectional chain. You can't pass up and down from here.
Yes, but I believe next is also.
No.
Is that not the case?
No. So next,
Also not.
when you are at the user loader, similar to what happens with the default hook implementations, you can call up the chain, and the thing up the chain can respond down to you. and then you can respond further down. Because
How does it
anything
go back up?
returned.
Mhm.
So in this concept, a userland loader would be considered the lower, and the closer you get to the default implementation would be considered higher. So if you call a higher loader with next, just like right now with the default implementations, you get a value back, and you can operate on that value and alter it. And so that's what you get. You send a value up and you get a value back down, because you can alter it before you return in your loader hook.
So, Jacob, do you mind maybe pulling up the other design? Like if you go to the loaders homepage and click on design.
Yes.
I'm just trying to, I'm not quite sure I'm following what Bradley's talking about, so I'm trying to think if there's an example in here that like,
Yeah, I'm having trouble noodling that as well.
Just look for something that uses the return value of next. Anything that uses the return value of next.
maybe the,
Like this?
not,
And so you send data into it, the specifier and the context. You operate on the result of it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're operating in two directions.
But then it doesn't get sent back anywhere.
It's
Like
returned
this
to
would
whatever
be
called this loader hook.
right. So let's say
Which could be a different loader.
right. So let's say you've got loader foo, loader bar, and then default loader.
Yep.
Loader foo is furthest from default loader.
Yep.
So loader foo is calling loader bar, and loader bar is calling default.
Yep.
Bar calls default, does something, changes it in some way, returns, that goes to foo.
Yep.
Foo does something and returns, and then it's done.
Yep.
How, I don't understand how there's like two directions happening.
I can operate on the thing I pass as foo. I can operate on things I pass to bar, and I can also operate on the result of bar.
I see. Okay, but it's not a back and forth kind of thing. It's just
If you want,
it controls the inputs.
You can
And,
call
well, like you have to call bar multiple
number
times.
Well,
like I think,
Okay.
like
usually you'll only call it once.
well,
But
let's
like
look
you
at
could.
Yeah,
the example
so
that you
that's-
have highlighted, though, Jacob. Like, I guess this is a good example in that it's like the line you have highlighted. Like we could modify the specifier that we pass in to whatever the next loader on the chain is.
Right. Yes.
And then we also are able to modify what the next loader or series of loaders returns.
Yes.
Whereas in the other approach, that wouldn't be. I guess the other question is like, if in the other design, like the next design or the done design, whatever your design, let's say you have like loader A and loader B and then default, and they're supposed to run in that order, right? Loader A, or sorry, loader A, you know, and it's a resolve chain. Loader A gets, you know, specifier and context, and then it returns a URL. And then what loader B somehow needs to get all of those. It needs to get the URL, it needs to get what was returned by A, as well as the original input, specifier and context.
It has that.
Okay.
But it needs to detect that it's not the first in the chain. Otherwise, it'll accidentally throw away the result.
Right. It's almost like you've got the reverse problem where it's easy to like, just as in this design, it's easy to short circuit by forgetting to call next. In the other one, it's easy to the opposite of short circuit, like throw away the previous loader's work by forgetting to do an if check that, like, if there was some previously returned value, you know?
So I think that would be then here. So interim result
Yeah.
is that says whatever the previous loader did, that's this. If it's the first one, then it's some kind of initialized value or nothing, empty string, what have you. And then it still has access to the original unadulterated values. I forget how, where, but it does. So it would probably
it would be those other parameters, the parameters you have commented out there. You're probably commenting them out because they're not being used in this particular loader. But I assume that resolve is meant to take 4 parameters.
Yes. I just don't remember what I stuck them under. But yes, I did consider that it might need access to whatever the original stuff was. But I figured that it would most commonly want to operate on whatever the result of the previous thing was. So that's this first argument here.
So what's the argument? Like if I get, so we had foo bar default. What would foo get as its arguments in total? Because it hasn't done the default yet? Or is the default already run before any user loaders run?
No, the default loader is the very final.
Because like some of the specifiers might be things that Node would error on.
Right.
So like an HTTPS specifier. So the default has to be last.
Right. So in the natural.
Okay.
So like, for instance, if you have foo, bar, and default in this done pattern, if foo returned nothing, it would go to bar. And if bar did nothing, default would run. But all loaders in the chain have access to default because it's sort of like a special thing. So if foo uses default, that doesn't preclude default getting called at the end. It just says, like, here's this utility that you can use.
So what is the value of interim results in the beginning?
Value previous didn't have anything. It starts out as an empty string.
So you have to detect.
I mean, shouldn't it be undefined?
Good. I think I put it as empty string because it's of type string. And then if it's an empty string, it's still falsy.
Well,
but if we prefer undefined, sure.
Whatever, that's a finer point we can debate later. But
yeah. Oh, here we go. Original specifier. I shoved it under context.
So every loader in theory needs to detect both cases, right?
What do you mean?
You always have to check if there's an existing interim result because that's the default thing most people want to operate on. And then you also have to assume it might not exist.
Sorry, I misspoke. If it's the first one in the chain, the value of interim result is the original specifier. And then original specifier is also persisted under context original specifier. It can't be.
No, because the interim result has to be an object with URL and format. The original specifier is not a URL. It's just a string.
Yes. So like the URL would be original specifier.
I don't think we can have that because like most loaders are gonna probably like the HTTPS loader that maybe not the one in this example, but in the other design, it's sort of like if specifier starts with HTTPS, do something else kind of pass through. So under your design here, it would be like if, specifier, wherever that's coming from,
Mhm.
starts with HTTPS, do something else, return interim result. As in, if this is not the first loader in the chain, like it's a pass through. It's like a does nothing type of thing. Whatever the loader ahead of this one returned should continue to be the result of this one.
Which should work fine as long as you don't need to mutate the result to the default.
Well, it does raise the question of like, what am I returning? Like, if interim result is like interim result, it feels like it should be the mutable result of the whole loader chain. Like if I just like say interim result.url equals something, that should be enough. I shouldn't have to return it,
I mean,
not that we want to encourage mutability versus immutability, but
I was
like,
just going to say, I feel like we shouldn't encourage that.
but I would assume that that's what would happen.
I think it would just ignore it because it would be checking the return value. But we could set it to check interim result and check for mutations and whatever on it. But I think it would be safer to check something returned.
I guess the thing. Go ahead.
Is there any mechanical difference? Because interim result can't be shared amongst loaders. So
why not?
Sorry,
Wouldn't it just be an object?
Can you give me
because you could mutate from other loaders. Yeah. So if we have foo and bar, if foo for some forbidden race conditioning reason has an operation that mutates interim result after bar gets interim result, that's bad. That's some kind of corruption. So I don't think
that could happen because these functions are async, so therefore like pieces of them could execute out of order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't think interim result can be shared, but on that point, if it can't be shared, is there any reason you wouldn't want to return interim result normally? Because you said if we had like a false or didn't pass a value to done, it would be a pass through. Sounds like it would be a pass through if you always passed interim result to done.
Like if you called done and gave it a value, that value would be considered the final value. If you have interim result in this scenario is merely an input. So if you returned interim result,
you define final value?
As in short
the
circuit,
the chain breaks. The chain breaks, short circuit, no other loaders are called. Whatever was passed to done is the value, the settled value.
Okay. So
in the next example, like in the next proposal, it would be like not calling next and just merely returning.
So to rephrase that, a pass-through loader could just be always returning interim result.
A pass-through meaning the loader is intending to step aside and do nothing.
Effectively nothing.
Okay, yeah, you could return interim result and achieve the same kind of thing. I was thinking that it would be a little bit cleaner to allow it to just do nothing. And then you can like put at the top of your file, like if not HTTPS return. You could say they must return interim result or something, but that seems putting more burden on the user to know that
I think
interim result is required.
what Jeffrey was getting at was if we always just read off interim result, because we can't share it ever at the
Mhm.
end, is there ever a reason to let people return anything?
But
Like why would we ever have them return an object rather than,
I mean, returning could be how they signal that they want to short circuit versus do nothing.
well, yeah, but if we have interim results already allocated,
Mhm.
I mean, what are we getting by making them allocate another thing? Potentially as a pattern?
Sorry, I don't understand what you mean. If it's already
Why-
allocated, why do we need to allocate something else?
Yeah, so
You're talking about like memory?
returning nothing,
Uh-huh.
whatever nothing means, uses interim result.
Effectively, yes. Just if it
Where-
returns
in-
nothing, it just allows them to not know that.
In what realistic scenarios is it gonna be simpler to generate a new object versus letting them assign to interim result?
If they can assign to interim result and then that gets passed along, they can add extra stuff. They
Well,
could
it's definitely,
delete.
you
They could
definitely don't
delete
want to pass
format.
it along.
Yeah. So how I was imagining the implementation of this being is I would check to see that the return value is an object and then pluck format and URLs values from that. And if those are truthy or whatever, create a new object with those values and then pass that to the next loader and discard the old interim result.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, cool. But if we want to require them to return interim result instead of returning nothing, I think that could also be okay. Just seems like a little bit extra that we don't need to make them do.
I mean, it's about clarity.
Well, it's,
You don't
we
want to,
also,
you don't want to get into a case where you think you've called done, but you didn't. And so it didn't short circuit and now it goes down the chain.
yeah, it's the opposite problem.
How,
I mean, the other,
how could that happen?
You have a bad if condition. And you've got an early return right after you're done. So you call done and then you return semicolon right after it.
Yeah.
So if,
Like I would expect if someone is calling done, they would return done.
but they don't have to. I usually put return on separate lines from done kind of functions. So
You could. That seems more dangerous to me, but maybe it's not.
it avoids me worrying about return values being passed down if the API changes.
Okay.
But no, I mean, overall seems fine. Seems about the same level of concern as what we've got right now. My main concern still is it's one direction. You can't pass in both directions.
Do you
We might be
yeah,
able-
that's, well, that's what I was gonna say though, is like, what's the node default one ever doing in this case? Because it's like, it's.
You mean here?
Well, no, by the time, like node's default is always the end of the chain. So does like node's default resolve kind of like, if interim result exists, return it, else take the original inputs and do the regular node, you know, thing as if there were no loaders, no custom loaders. So
I
like,
think, yes. I think it would be like if you return an incomplete something, then the default loader at the end of the chain would step in. If you returned completed stuff, it would say like, cool, there's nothing for this to do, because you still have access to default resolve or whatever, what have you, in the second to last one. So if you needed it, you still can use it.
Is there a reason it should be default here? Like foo, like bar may be a loader that intentionally never wants foo to directly call the default loader. So like we could have a loader that prevents you from loading child process.
How?
So in next design, you have a condition if, you know, they get to your loader and it's resolve calls to you and you see node colon child process as the result, you throw in there.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess if you flip the directions and they don't have this default resolver, I guess really it's not about that. It's about what are you using default resolver forever?
It does like file system reads. It does.
But other loaders may be changing it.
Default resolver. I don't remember what default resolver does. Like if the file is JavaScript, like .js, and it would normally handle this itself. I don't know if you would need to default resolver, for instance, in resolve.
Well,
but
I was saying like
you would need default load.
Well,
why do we need default load? Because you
default load.
I would think you shouldn't, because like that now you're mixing the two styles. Like calling default load or default resolve from within yours is like doing the other design.
Well, the first loader would definitely need it to potentially try to see the result of the default loader. But that means none of the subsequent loaders could check. They have to use the interim result that's passed to them.
Right. It's like you can, like, say I wanted to mess with the specifier. So I wanted the next loader in the chain to use a different specifier. Like that, like if you go to the other example, that's all it's doing is changing the specifiers or the other design
format.
Sorry, the other tab, the other tab in your browser.
So every loader,
like this one is just changing the specifiers from one to the next. You know, I don't think this is possible in the new design, because like the new design,
it's possible, but it's a little, like you said, mixed.
No, because the second loader in the chain gets the original specifier and it gets the interim result, but the interim result is a URL, not a specifier.
Well, URLs are valid specifiers.
Yeah. So like it would be, let's say,
right, but yes, they're valid specifiers, but like, for example, like say you wanted to write a loader that always replaced underscore with Lodash. Okay. So you would see the specifier would be specifier. There would be like if specifier is underscore return next Lodash comma context. Right. And that's a way of like, I just replaced the specifier, but I didn't replace it with a URL. This is not a valid URL that could be a valid return value. It's just a new specifier. And I'm relying on some other loader in the chain to actually resolve this, which could just be the node default one if that's the only other one in the chain, but at least I have that ability.
Yes. So I think maybe the name of this property is confusing and how I've been referring to it. It doesn't have to be a fully qualified URL. It only has to be a fully qualified URL at the end. So like, let's say foo.
Just call it dot specifier. Just don't call it dot URL
Okay.
for this conversation, at least.
Okay. So let's say foo does that. Foo detects, let's say you've got underscore slash for each, and it changes that to Lodash slash for each. That's fine. It can pass that along to bar, and then bar will look at that and say like, I don't know, maybe bar is for unpackage or something, and it says like, I need to go fetch this from somewhere, or it's so then it replaces it with an HTTPS like actual URL.
Well, but
That's
but
fine.
how does? But then there's no distinction between whether it's a specifier or a URL. Like by the time it gets to the last one, node, how is node supposed to know if it's supposed to use it as is or run it through the regular resolve?
Node always has to call resolve on it. Always in this design.
Always have to.
Node always
Sorry,
has to resolve the result because it can't always guarantee it's an absolute URL specifier.
Probably,
so anything,
yes.
any short circuiting, anything that gets to the end of the chain that gets to the default loader has to check if it's a URL. And if it's not, it has to, do the whole default resolve.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, checking if it's a URL is resolving it.
You have to do it either way. So
Yeah.
meh.
I think the main difference would be for the load hook, where no, actually, I think maybe
no, it's yeah, because you have the same issue there. It's like here, scroll down a second to the example with the load. Okay, so in this case, load takes as input a URL and returns as output the format and the source.
Mhm.
If I wanted to maybe go to the CoffeeScript one because it might be simpler than this.
Let me do something real quick here.
I need 30 seconds.
Oh, whoops. Did I break the sharing?
I see. Yeah, basically. Want to share it again?
Let me just do. Yeah. There. How's this? Okay, so on the right is the design document, and on the left is the proposal issue.
Okay. All right. So if we go to the CoffeeScript loader on the right, on the right.
Sorry. Mm-hmm.
So load gets URL and returns format and source. Okay. So let's say trying to think of an example, but like let's say this load hook for some reason wanted to rewrite the URL that the next load hook processes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think it should not do that, should it?
Well, it can in this form.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, maybe the HTTPS example one was a better example. If you scroll down, like say, so this is the HTTPS loader, right? Mm-hmm. Imagine there's another loader called the HTTP loader, mm-hmm. right? That all it does is that if it sees a URL that starts with HTTP:// it rewrites it to HTTPS and then calls the next loader. Now that's like kind of resolve, like shouldn't that have happened in resolve, but
yes.
But it could happen here.
It could, but I think since it shouldn't, we don't need to consider that.
I'm wondering if there's a need for that use case. Maybe there's not.
Because what I'm thinking is that you'll encounter like weird cache issues because URL as it is provided to load is the cache key. And then if
For now,
the load hook, yeah,
not to be.
okay. Well, if the load hook starts like doing arbitrary things and not respecting basically what is the canonical value, then I think you'll get yourself into trouble.
I don't understand what you mean canonical value, because
Like
load is
the
perfectly
value
allowed
of,
to do stuff. It's very
right,
important
but
for mocking and things that URL does not actually match some physical real thing. So
okay. What
if
do you
I
mean?
get
Like,
if I get a mocked URL,
yeah.
it's basically a version number plus a real URL. And it never fetches properly under that state. You have to undo the transform for your mocking. So you have to separate it out. So there's no real canonical URL.
Well, sorry, official. I just
Okay.
mean like as far as official as it can get, the value passed into URL is the resolved value. So I think the resolved value is intended to be like the God's truth. Like that is what the URL of this module is.
Well, that's used to figure out what load does. It's not, there's no
Yeah.
truth. It could do something completely different.
But what I'm thinking is if one load hook is changing this and calling next for another load hook, then I feel like that just opens a can of worms.
Well, this not really. So you could have a URL that's composed of multiple other URLs, like it's doing some kind of code splitting, or like web bundles where a single URL to a web bundle actually populates like 20 different modules if it's ever loaded. So all of those are where you get a single URL, but what you produce requires multiple URLs.
Okay. But each load hook is largely, in both scenarios, I believe, is largely ignorant of what out of the hook that came before it and the hook that will come after it.
I believe that is true in one direction for the done approach, but not true in either direction for the next.
How would it know in what next is?
It doesn't. That's the point. It knows how to call it and what it can see the result.
I mean,
So-
can I throw something
Go ahead.
out there? Like, I almost feel like the two approaches are almost like summarized by, like, the one on the right here next is essentially recursion, and the
Yeah.
one on the left is essentially like iteration. Like,
Yeah.
the one on the left is like you run a bunch of functions in series, almost as if you had an array of function calls. And the one on the right is like you run one function, and then inside that function it calls the next one. Inside that one it calls the next one. So it's like recursion, that it's like adding up the call stack.
Yes.
So similar to
actually,
similar to recursion, you can forget to like break out of it, but it lets you be more elegant in that you don't need as many inputs and outputs. Like, we don't have to have the variation of the function arguments versus or like the original arguments versus the interim result, because it's always just the arguments, like that's the recursion elegance in play.
yes.
I'm not sure I'd call it elegant, but it is more
or concise,
Well,
whatever, whatever
maybe
you call it.
Well, typically, when you're using recursion instead of iteration, it's because it's a little bit more like human mind friendly. I don't know if that's really
Not for
the
me,
case
at
here, but
least.
yeah, I'm
I mean, I
not
feel like most
particularly
people
a
hate
fan of recursion.
recursion and
Yes,
avoid it whenever possible, but
yes. But
still.
actually, that reminds me. So we do not expect to have tons of loaders. So we're not going to get into like a Stack Overflow kind of situation probably.
Well,
But
a loader can't call itself. So like you're never going to have the infinite loop issue that you could get with recursion. It's not
Right.
actually recursion because it's not calling itself. I'm just saying like it's similar in that it's like the call stack is increasing. Similar to
Right,
how
that's why I
it's
was
similar to
calling.
Express, like Express middleware, each piece of Express middleware calls the next one. So if you set a breakpoint in like one of your route handlers, it's got a tremendous call stack of like, however many pieces of
Yes.
middleware you had in your application, because they're all wrappers around whatever you set the breakpoint on.
So
Yeah,
that's
that's why I was
not
calling it like.
true in the old PR. We would unroll it. Like actually calling it without doing an async tick in between, you would get that. But if you do an async tick in between, you drop all the nesting at that point. So you
Can you
can
do that?
do it, whatever. Yeah, it's just like when you call set timeout, you lose the call stack, for example, where you call.
Oh, okay, but you don't lose like the context and stuff.
Yeah.
Would you? I think you would still potentially have this problem that I am a little bit concerned of. Let's say you have 6 loaders that are in this inception model. You get down to the 6th level deep, 6th dungeon, and let's say each one of the loaders. Let's say each one of the loaders sticks something huge into memory. That memory cannot be released until all of the inception chain kind of like collapses back up into reality.
No.
Right?
No.
Is that not true?
Nope.
Why is that not true?
I'm not sure. It would need to have a reference to hold on to. So we had foo bar default. Let's say foo calls bar allocates 100 megabytes of memory for an image or something. It returns a result to foo. Unless bar is leaking memory, only foo now has the reference to the 100 megabytes. Bar doesn't. If foo doesn't keep it somehow purposefully, it'll be garbage collected.
Well, I'm thinking, so let's say you've got, let's switch to letters, A, B, C, D, E, F. Each one of those, like A is calling B, and then
Sure.
B is calling C.
Yeah.
But A and B, and each one that calls before, each one of those is loading 100 megabytes of images. So when you get down to like F, the previous hooks.
If you would set a breakpoint in F, then you would see the call stack, like F, above that would be E, above that would be D, etc. So yeah, everything allocated, everything in A that got allocated before the call to B would still be in memory.
Yeah. But with done,
you could,
since it's a loop.
but I mean, you could do that with the loop serial style too.
No, because it will have finished.
No, because I can attach stuff anywhere. I can keep stuff alive using set timeouts and stuff like that. I might have data intentionally loaded, even small amounts of data intentionally loaded, waiting on the results of whatever comes next in the chain. So while it's possible, I believe both leak memory if you allocate a ton and hold on to it. You would need to reap the whole function scope.
I'm thinking in the loop scenario, it's much less likely. Like you would have to try, but in the sort of like inception recursion types of scenario, you could quite, I would say, innocently in that.
I'm not sure what scenario you're thinking of that would allow that to generally occur. Like,
Let's
let's
say
take get source as an example. Like if you're trying to get the source of something and you get a result, what are you calling the next for?
Let's say I'm getting get source on, well, let's say first I load over HTTPS some string or some data. Then it turns out that that data is TypeScript. TypeScript, I have the raw TypeScript. I need to pass that to a TypeScript loader. Then the TypeScript loader is going to do some stuff internally. Let's say, for instance, for some reason, it is using Babel to do some transpiling stuff, and then TypeScript is also going to do the conversion. Each one of those things would probably be holding on to its raw source, and then would be getting a result.
But in both scenarios, when the higher level loader, F, is done with its work, F drops its references.
Yeah, but they're holding them until
but you
the stack
can't do it out
starts
of order. You're trying to do it in reverse order. You need to get the source at the default level somehow. That has to pass through probably Babel first, it sounds like. And then it passes down to TypeScript. And so if F is the default, it holds onto the string, it passes it to Babel, E, it does its processing and stops, and so it drops. Then it passes it back to TypeScript, it does its processing, drops. So I'm trying to understand, in what scenario does a loader prior to calling next allocate something big in a realistic scenario? Because it has to allocate it prior to calling next for this leak to really occur.
Yes. Hold on, where's the CoffeeScript one? So for instance, result here is, this is basically like the raw result. So this is the string of the CoffeeScript file. Then source here is passing that raw CoffeeScript file to the CoffeeScript compiler. And then that's going to return the transpiled source. So
that's true for both, effectively. Yeah.
For which? For
both the loop and the recursive form.
No, I think because, well, let's say there are multiple levels here, though. So let's say CoffeeScript, the result of CoffeeScript subsequently needs to be transpiled by Babel. That would need to happen after the CoffeeScript stuff gets compiled. So that would be sort of this interim thing here. But
so the const source equals gets garbage collected before it goes out to the Babel loader.
I think the Babel loader would be one of the nexts.
No, definitely not. Absolutely not. So load ordering matters. Because you can't give CoffeeScript to Babel. So so it can't be next.
No, sorry, one of the next. So in your loader where you have ABCD, whatever, Babel would be one of them, CoffeeScript would be one of them, and then something else would be one of them. So you would have
Babel would Babel would work on the result of CoffeeScript. That works for both models.
Yeah. But then you still have the raw source of the file.
Okay.
plus something else.
I
But
don't
over-
understand the something else.
I'm trying to create a more complicated situation because it requires a complicated, like many steps.
I understand. I
okay.
understand the complicated situation. I don't understand how if Babel calls Babel before Babel is doing its operations, CoffeeScript occurs.
Yeah.
In both scenarios, CoffeeScript finishes its operation
Mhm.
and then passes the result to Babel.
Yes. So whatever CoffeeScript did internally is gone.
Yes, including
Yeah, yeah.
holding on to the source
Right.
in both scenarios.
Wait, the source wouldn't
So
that
next
have been...
is not going to call Babel ever. Next is going to call the default loader of some kind or some HTTPS loader. You're trying to conflate next with calling an operation that works on JavaScript. Here, this is the CoffeeScript loader takes CoffeeScript
Mhm.
and does an operation on it and results in JavaScript, which Babel can work on.
Mhm.
Because of that, you can't call the load operation of Babel within the load operation of a CoffeeScript loader, because next is not telling you, hey, there's another transform to do.
Mhm.
Next is saying, what would I normally get? You're calling the next loader. You're not saying I have results to pass along.
Right. If you call the next loader, it says like there's something else that needs to be done.
No. In the next recursive form, you just return a result. So you only operate when you are called and you return results. You're not saying there's more work to be done. You're saying you need the results of something else.
Well, okay, yes.
So CoffeeScript doesn't need the result of Babel.
Yes.
Babel needs the result of CoffeeScript. So
Yes.
Babel calls next in order to get the result of this CoffeeScript load.
Like using the right example, a Babel loader would look just like this one, where it just replace CoffeeScript.compile with Babel.compile, and like other than that, it's identical.
Right, and then where it says,
and then it's on you to like load them in the right order, like dash just loader.
Yeah. So then
Babel, that's just loader coffee, or vice versa.
Here, this result would be
like
the
if
result
it's just,
of CoffeeScript.
say CoffeeScript is the only loader, this result is what comes from Node's default load, which is just like reading the file off the disk.
Yeah, but in the Babel scenario, this result would have been the result of that default loader and then also CoffeeScript. So now this is just the CoffeeScript.
Correct. And the CoffeeScript's scope has been garbage collected by that point.
Okay. I think.
Because next is done executing.
Okay. Never mind then. I don't know
So
why, for some reason, when I was thinking about this earlier.
We should think of a better name than next. I think a lot of this is coming from
I almost wonder
next.
if it's really previous. Because it's sort of
it is literally previous.
Let's not use a direction. It is not previous. We've had top, down, above, below, next, previous. Directions are bad.
I don't know what to call it though.
I mean, like I said, you need the result of something. So
other loader
process, maybe. Like you need something to process this for you. It's not directional. Like pre-process is a bad word, but it's roughly what it's doing.
But that doesn't really indicate what it is.
Why do you need to know what it is? You know its API signature. Do you need to know if it's the CoffeeScript loader?
Sorry, I meant like its purpose.
Like you
Like,
need
what
to
is it
know
gonna
that
do
it's
for me?
another hook. You could just
Yeah.
call it hook,
Pre-process
like
dot
Earl
load,
context hook, and it's like
whatever.
whatever the next or previous hook in the chain. I mean, I think you need to have a concept of next and previous though, because you need to know like what order to put these things
Sequence.
in. Like,
I think
yeah,
we
because
should
you
do
'cause-
left and right, just the CLI ordering. CLI argument. ordering.
well, sure, but then you can, but we're not going to offer left. We're only going to offer right. You know, so it's
Sure.
like,
That's fine.
huh? Right. So like next is like, say it's dash dash loader CoffeeScript dash dash loader Babel, and then that's it. And then there's three loaders in the chain. It's those two, and then the default, the node one. So Babel would load first, would run
In the
first.
recursive version.
Right. It would
Yeah.
run first because it calls next, which calls coffee, which calls next, which calls node.
Yep.
Mhm.
So it's in a sense, it's like it's running in the opposite order of left to right because it's similar to a function call. Like if you did like A parentheses B parentheses C, C runs first, returns to B, which returns to A. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Hi. Kid arrived. We're a little bit over. I'm gonna have to.
Oh,
Anyway,
yes.
Jacob,
Mhm.
where do we go from here? Do you want to maybe, I would suggest if you don't mind, maybe let's close the issue on the main node repo and start like say a new issue or a PR on the loaders repo with like a revised design, maybe a PR.
Okay, yes.
And then we
Okay.
can just iterate on that off sync, and that way we can include everybody else.
Okay. How would I incorporate any potential changes that we would want to have to the next one, such as renaming it from
Why don't we
next
maybe make
to right? Or
why don't we make two files? So like we can make one, we should come up with names for the two of them that are like one's whatever we can call it,
Iterative and-
recursive and iterative or something like that.
Yeah.
And then like maybe that could be a quick PR we land to just rename this one to like recursive design, and then you can create a PR to add iterative design as just a separate markdown file. And then
Okay.
in that PR, we can iterate and do lots of notes, and you could keep revising it until it's the best it can be. And then, you know, it eventually goes in and we can, you know, choose one and then delete the other file as a final PR or something like that.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, I think it'll be a lot easier to work than dealing with like a GitHub issue where it's like, it's hard for you to, you know, there's no change log of what you're changing in the big code blocks.
Yes.
So,
And then nobody gets notified when I just update the summary and stuff. Yeah.
but yeah, I feel
Sounds
like these
better.
both have pros and cons. Like I feel like there's a lot of, I understand what you're trying to do with like trying to eliminate the, you know, failure to call the thing to short circuit, but at the same time, like the new design just adds a lot. You know, there's more inputs to the function and there's more potential outputs to the function. So it just feels a lot more complex to me.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I mean, maybe that complexity is better because there's more opportunities for explicitness. So I don't really know what's better, but I feel like both of them could be improved to get to their better versions of themselves. So maybe we should kind of develop both of them and then kind of see from there and get feedback from people and like what use cases would be missing from each one.
One thing we could do is we can combine them. It would be gross, but it's doable. Basically, if you take the recursive form and have you must call either next or kind of a skip function, whatever, or short circuit function, kind of like how done is in the iterative form. I mean, that would make it error in either case. The author must be explicit.
Well, that's what I meant by like developing the
Yeah,
original
I think
proposal to
we'll
be
eventually
a
merge
better
parts
version of
both.
itself.
We're gonna merge parts of both over time and figure it out.
Okay. Yeah,
Yep.
my main concern was only that it seemed quite easy to accidentally do something that you did not want to do.
Well,
So
I mean,
if-
I guess
if merely
here's the thing,
copying
like
over
if
is-
that's all we're trying to solve,
Mhm.
then is the new design the most efficient way to do that? Because like, could there be a much more minor change to the original design that achieves that? Maybe not, but I feel like there probably could be. Now, I feel like that's not all you had in mind when you came up with a whole new design. Like you probably wanted some of these other ideas for certain things. And so I think that, and that's worthwhile. I'm not saying that that's bad or anything. So, but I think we should call that out. Like, what are all the advantages of the new proposal? It's not just that you're less likely to short circuit by accident. So,
Oh yeah, no, that was just like
we
the
should
big one.
explain all of explain all of those things. So,
Okay, cool. I shall do.
Yeah, and I think we can just preemptively add those required to short circuit assertions as a PR to node core. That seems fine either way.
required to short circuit, what?
So if you don't call next, you have to call this other function to denote you intentionally are short circuiting. We can just PR that and have it be a no op for now. Do a warning maybe. Yeah.
Well, so in a current node code base, because like even our example loaders, some of them don't like if you look at the current HTTPS loader, it never calls default load because that wouldn't make sense, Like this one here is unchanged whether it's chained or not, because this one is always the end of the line.
Yeah, but
Well,
I mean, just having a warning so that they don't do that on accident. We can update all the examples. We
yeah,
can
I mean, it would
discuss
just
this
be
in a
like there would
PR.
be some other parameter in there, like next, comma, short circuit or something, or skip or whatever you want to call it. And then it's like the function has to call one or the other. If it calls short circuit or skip, whatever we call it, then that's a way of just swallowing the error. It would be like a no op to
Yeah, but
make
we
sure
should
they
at
didn't
least
forget.
we should at least warn people if there are errors in the wild that we already know exist. So we can just do that.
But I also wonder, like, are we really overthinking this? Like, that's a lot of handholding just because someone forgot to make a function call. Like, if they
Sure.
have a bug in their loader, it'll get found out. So one way or another, you know what I mean?
I'm less confident, but
I mean, here's the thing: is like I feel like lots of people are going to publish loaders that don't work when chained, and people are gonna complain. They're gonna open issues like, "Hey, I tried to chain against your loader and it didn't work." And then they're gonna like actually test their loader chained against someone else's loader and realize like, oh, I'm not returning the thing, or I'm not calling the thing, or whatever, and they'll fix it. And I feel like neither of these designs really prevents that, I don't think. I don't know if there is a way to prevent that, but
we can add a lot of warnings and it'll prevent it. And they'll see when they're not doing it. But no.
Anyway, that's just something to think about. I don't know if there's a design that solves that problem, but
Okay.
all right, we should get going. But let me know. I can open like the precursor PR, just like renaming the file in the repo or something, and then let me know, and we can coordinate that stuff and then get it up there for other people to review. And I will, and then so I'll assume we'll meet 2 weeks from today, same time. I'm trying to get access. I asked for access to the calendar to move the meeting officially. And then we can like move it ad hoc as needed for the other people who are occasional visitors.
Okay, good. Sounds great.
All right.
Okay, thanks. See ya.
No.
Cheers.